The scent of wood shavings and varnish lingered in the air, a comforting aroma that spoke of my father's world, a world he had invited me into since I was a young boy. The workshop was a sanctuary, a place of creation and reflection, where the sounds of chisels and saws harmonized with the rhythm of life. The wooden beams overhead seemed to absorb the secrets whispered between us, holding them in trust. It was a place where my father taught me the value of patience and precision, as we crafted pieces that carried both beauty and a piece of our souls. I often visited the workshop, even after his passing. The familiarity was a balm to my grief, softening the edges of my loss. My father was a craftsman, but he was also a man of stories. Stories that danced along the line between reality and something other, something deeper. He spoke of the wood's voice, how each grain and knot told the tale if only one knew how to listen. And he spoke of an old box, a relic of his own father that he had hidden away. I never thought much of it until the day I found it. The box was unassuming at first glance, tucked away in a shadowed corner of the workshop, beneath a tattered cloth that had dulled with age. Made of a dark, almost black wood, it seemed to absorb the light around it. There were no seams, no hinges visible, just a smooth, unbroken surface that defied understanding. A curious thing, it felt warm to the touch, as if holding a latent energy within its confines. It was unlike anything I had seen among my father's tools or creations. I dismissed it initially, returning to the task at hand, a simple cabinet repair. But the presence of the box lingered in my thoughts, an itch that demanded to be scratched. Later that evening, as the shadows grew long and the world outside quieted, I found myself drawn back to it. I sat on the old creaking stool, the box before me, and let my fingers trace the intricate carvings that covered its surface. Patterns seemed to flow beneath my touch, shifting in the dim light. It was then that I noticed the inscription. Tiny, almost imperceptible, words etched into the wood with a precision that seemed beyond human hand. Vitae Reditus, it read, a phrase that tugged at the edges of my memory from long-forgotten Latin lessons. The return of life. I shivered, not from cold, but from an unnameable anticipation that thrummed through my veins. The first disturbance came soon after. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the evening's light fading into a gentle dusk, when the box, still in the workshop, began to hum a low, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through the walls. It was a distant melody at first, barely discernible from the ambient noises of nightfall. Yet it grew stronger, a siren call that pulled at the fringes of my consciousness. Curiosity tempered by a thread of unease, I made my way to the workshop. The door creaked open, and the humming intensified, a throbbing resonance that emanated from the box. It lay there, untouched, yet it was alive with a force I could not comprehend. Cautiously, I approached, my fingers reaching for the warmth of its surface once more. In that moment, the workshop seemed to dissolve around me. The scent of wood and varnish faded, replaced by a cool, crisp air that smelled of earth and life newly awoken. I stood in a forest clearing, vibrant and alive, as if the world had been stripped bare and remade anew. The box lay open before me, though I could not recall opening it, and from within came a whisper, soft and sibilant, yet clear in its intent. Bring me what was lost, and I shall return what was taken. The words resonated within me, a promise and a bargain wrapped in mystery. I knew instinctively what it meant, though I dared not acknowledge it. My father, taken too soon by the cruel hands of fate, could be returned. The thought was intoxicating. A forbidden fruit held just beyond my grasp. But as quickly as I was thrust into this otherworldly scene, the vision faded, leaving me alone in the dimly lit workshop, heart pounding with the echoes of that whispered offer. Days passed, and the box remained silent, its promises unspoken, yet ever present in my mind. I tried to dismiss the memory as a trick of the light, a dream conjured by grief and longing. But the pull of the box was unyielding, a tether to something beyond my understanding. Each night I found myself returning to it, drawn by the mysterious allure of what might be. The escalation began subtly. I started to notice changes in the workshop. Tools misplaced, as if used and returned in haste. Shavings on the floor, though I had not been working on any projects. It was as if the space had a life of its own, carrying on the legacy of creation in my absence. The humming, too, returned, sporadic at first, then more frequent, a constant presence that seemed to mold itself into the very fabric of the workshop. One night the whisper came again, though this time it was not in any dream or vision. It slipped into the stillness of the room, unbidden yet familiar. Bring me what was lost. The voice was patient, understanding, as if aware of the turmoil within me. I could feel the box's presence, its promise lingering on the edge of reality, waiting for me to act. Torn between longing and fear, I decided to test the boundaries of this strange pact. A simple plant, wilted and brown, sat neglected on a shelf by the window. I placed it before the box, half expecting nothing to happen, but as the lid lifted ever so slightly, a soft glow enveloped the plant, and before my astonished eyes, it revived, leaves unfurling, color returning, life restored in an instant. The box was no mere relic, it was something far greater, a vessel of unimaginable power. But with power came questions. What unspoken cost might accompany such a gift? What price would the box demand for the return of something far more precious than a mere plant? The climax came unexpectedly. A storm had swept in, sudden and violent, battering the house with wind and rain. The power flickered, casting the rooms into shadow, as if the world itself conspired with the box to draw me to it once more. I found myself in the workshop, the hum of the box a rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. Bring me what was lost, the voice urged, a gentle insistence that brooked no refusal. My father's journal lay beside the box, a leather-bound relic of his thoughts and dreams. Within its pages, I found the story of the box, passed down through generations, a tale of resurrection, of deals struck in the twilight between life and death. The journal spoke of a pact, an agreement made with forces beyond comprehension. It was not the devil, as folklore would suggest, but something older, an entity that watched over the balance of life and death, a guardian of the cycle. The price, it warned, was not to be taken lightly. To return a life, another must be given in its stead, a balance maintained. Desperation gripped me, the storm outside warring with the storm within. Could I condemn another to reclaim my father? Could I bear the weight of such a decision? Yet the longing for his presence, the ache of his absence, overwhelmed my reason. The box seemed to pulse with understanding, as if waiting for my... In that moment, clarity struck, a truth hidden beneath layers of grief and desire. The box was not a savior, but a test, a challenge to see beyond the surface of my longing. To reach for the past was to forsake the present, to sacrifice potential for memory. My father's teachings, his stories, were his true legacy. Not just the man himself, but what he left behind in me. The storm abated, the world outside returning to calm as the box fell silent, its fume receding into stillness. I closed the lid gently, my decision made. My father's heart beat within me, his wisdom a living part of who I had become. The box, I realized, was not a tool of resurrection, but a reminder of life's fragile beauty, of the necessity of letting go. The lingering fear remained, a shadow on the edge of my consciousness, but it was a fear tempered by understanding, a reminder of the choices that define us. The box remained in its corner, a guardian of secrets and stories untold, its power dormant yet present, a silent testament to the mysteries that surround us, the thin veil between life and what lies beyond. And so, I continued my visits to the workshop, the legacy of my father alive in each stroke of the chisel, each piece of wood transformed by hands guided by memory. The humming of the box was no longer a summons, but a gentle lullaby, a reminder of paths not taken, and the courage to face what is without losing ourselves to what might have been. It was a nondescript house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind that seems to blur into anonymity along any given street. To an outsider, our family home was typical. A two-story building with a sloped roof, a porch swing, and a yard that, like its owner, struggled with the concept of order. For as long as I can remember, our house has been a patchwork of improvements and updates, some more successful than others. My father was always handy with tools, but his talent was often overshadowed by his impatience. Still, he took pride in maintaining the house, tinkering with this and that, while my mother managed the rest with a quiet efficiency. I had grown up in this home, and though it sometimes seemed to groan under the weight of accumulated years and memories, it was comforting. The creaky floorboards, the drafty windows, even the basement with its earthy smell and faint chill, all these details were as familiar to me as the lines on my own hand. I found solace in the regularity of our routines, the predictability of our lives. There were no surprises in our home, or so I thought. The basement was a space I seldom visited. It was a repository for things rarely used or needed. Old furniture, holiday decorations, and boxes filled with the detritus of past lives. Dust boats danced in the beams of light slicing through narrow windows, casting shadows that writhed along the concrete floor. It wasn't a sinister place, merely neglected and forgotten, like an old book on a high shelf. One evening, my father asked me to fetch a toolbox from the basement. There was a leak under the kitchen sink that required immediate attention, and he was elbow-deep in water and frustration. I descended the stairs, the wood groaning beneath my weight, and flicked the light switch, half expecting the bulb to flicker in protest. The basement unfolded before me, revealing its cluttered but benign contents. The toolbox was right where it always was, beneath the workbench along the far wall. But today, my attention was drawn elsewhere, toward a large, unfamiliar object in the corner near the furnace. It was a chest, an old wooden trunk reinforced with iron bands. Dust gathered thickly on its surface. I couldn't recall ever seeing it before, and its sudden presence struck a discordant note in the symphony of familiarity. Curiosity piqued. I approached the chest. It was out of place among the orderly disarray of the basement, its dark wood seeming to absorb the light rather than reflect it. I traced a finger across its surface, leaving a smudge in the dust. There was no lock, just a simple latch that seemed to invite exploration. I hesitated for a moment, a fleeting whisper of unease curling in my stomach, but then dismissed it as silly. Opening the chest revealed a tangle of old, moth-eaten cloth, a faded tapestry of forgotten history. As I rifled through its contents, I felt the air in the basement shift, growing heavier. It was as if the chest had expelled a sigh of relief, a release from years of confinement. I found nothing of significance, only odds and ends, a cracked mirror, a tarnished silver comb, and an assortment of yellowed papers whose ink had long since bled into obscurity. I relatched the chest, dismissing its mystery as an indulgence of my imagination. I grabbed the toolbox and returned upstairs, the incident quickly forgotten amid the more immediate demands of a leaking kitchen sink. Yet, that night, I dreamt of the chest. I saw it in stark detail, the way the iron bands seemed to throb like veins, the wood pulsing with a life of its own. The dream left me unsettled, and though I shook it off come morning, a seed of curiosity had been planted. The following days were a blur of routine, the mundane rhythm of life marching on, yet something tugged at the edges of my consciousness, drawing me back to the basement. I found myself inventing reasons to go down there, each visit a clandestine opportunity to study the chest. I never opened it again, but its presence was enough, a silent sentinel in the shadows. Then came the first disturbance. A subtle shift that went unnoticed at first, things began to move around the house. Small objects disappearing only to reappear in odd places. My mother's knitting needles vanished from the armchair and were discovered later, inexplicably, in the attic. A photograph on the mantelpiece was found face down in the backyard, its glass cracked like a spider's web. Each incident was easily explained away, the quirks of a house settling into its foundations or our own forgetfulness. Yet, a part of me wondered if it had something to do with the chest. My father, ever the skeptic, dismissed my concerns when I mentioned them in passing. "You're just imagining things," he said with a cluck of his tongue, his hands busy with some new project. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss, that the chest had somehow altered the fabric of our home. It wasn't long before things escalated. The disturbances grew more frequent and severe. Strange noises echoed through the house at night, the sound of footsteps pacing the halls, whispers in a language I couldn't understand. Doors that were firmly shut would stand open by morning, and lights flickered ominously, casting the house in a strobe of shadow. Even the air felt different, charged with an electric tension that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I found myself drawn to the basement more often, as if the chest exerted a gravitational pull I couldn't resist. Each visit left me more uneasy, the atmosphere oppressive, as though the walls were closing in. The chest seemed to swell in size, the iron bands tightening like constricting serpents. One night, I noticed that a faint, dark stain had spread across the floor beneath it, a creeping blight that defied explanation. I confided in my mother, my voice trembling with the weight of my fears. She listened, her brow furrowed, and promised to look into it. But she, too, fell under the house's spell, her usual efficiency dulled by a growing lethargy. It was as if the chest had cast a pall over us all, sowing discord and confusion. The climax came unexpectedly, during a thunderstorm that raged with a ferocity I had never witnessed. Lightning split the sky, and the house shook with a rumble of thunder. I was alone, my parents having gone to visit relatives out of town. I had declined the invitation, claiming the need to study. But in truth, I was reluctant to leave, to abandon my post as warden of the chest's secret. That night, the chest called to me, its siren's song impossible to ignore. I descended into the basement, the stairs creaking in protest beneath my tread. The air was thick, suffused with the smell of ozone and something else, something earthy and decayed. As I approached, the chest seemed to glow with an inner light, its surface alive with a subtle, malevolent energy. Compelled by a force I couldn't name, I reached for the latch, my fingers trembling. The chest opened with a groan, as if voicing its displeasure. Inside, the contents had changed. Gone were the old cloth and trinkets, replaced by a single object. A stone, smooth and black, pulsing with a rhythmic heartbeat that echoed my own. I knew instinctively that this was the source of the disturbances, the heart of the malign presence that gripped our home. I picked up the stone, its surface cool despite the heat radiating from it. As I did, a vision unfurled before me. A cascade of images and emotions not my own. I saw a man, his eyes wild with desperation, sealing the chest and burying it deep, hoping to contain the curse it harbored. I felt his fear, his determination to protect his family at any cost. But the seal had broken, and with it the curse had seeped into every corner of our home, its tendrils weaving through our lives. The realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave. We were living on borrowed time, and the chest would not rest until it had claimed what it was owed. In a moment of clarity, I knew what needed to be done. I had to remove the stone, to banish it from our home before it consumed us entirely. Clutching it tightly, I ran back up the stairs, the basement door slamming shut behind me, with a finality that spoke of things left unfinished. I raced through the house, the storm outside mirroring the tempest within. Outside, the rain lashed against my skin, the wind howling like a banshee. I stumbled through the yard, the stone a leaden weight in my hand. At the edge of the property, I dug a hole, the mud yielding reluctantly to my efforts. With a fervent prayer to whatever gods might be listening, I placed the stone in the ground and covered it, the earth swallowing it with a gulp. As I stood, rain-soaked and weary, I felt an inexplicable peace, as if the house itself had exhaled a long-held breath. The storm abated, the clouds parting to reveal a sky washed clean. I returned inside. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, though the memory of its presence lingered like the fading scent of smoke. The following days saw a return to normalcy, though the experience had left its mark on me. I kept the chest, now empty, as a reminder of the events that had transpired, a testament to the power of secrets and the courage it takes to confront them. My parents never asked what had happened, and I never offered an explanation, content to let the mystery remain just that. Yet, as the days turned to weeks and weeks into months, I couldn't shake the feeling that the chest's story was not yet finished. There were times, late at night, when I would hear the faintest of whispers, a voice threading through the silence. It spoke of things forgotten and things yet to come, a reminder that some secrets are never truly buried. And so, life went on, the house settling once more into its familiar rhythms. Yet, beneath the surface, I knew that something had changed, that the chest had awakened a part of me I hadn't known existed. It had shown me the shadows that lurk in the corners of our world, and though the fear had receded, it had left an indelible mark. Even now, as I sit and write this, I feel the chest's presence in the periphery of my mind, a silent guardian of secrets, yet unspoken. I wonder at times what might happen if someone else were to open it, to let its story unfold anew. But for now, it rests quietly in the basement, waiting.
The house where I grew up stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, an unassuming two-story structure, typical of the suburban sprawl that marked the outskirts of our town. Its facade was painted a cheerful light blue, complemented by white shutters, and a small front porch with a wooden swing that creaked gently whenever the wind stirred. To any passerby, it was just another family home, filled with the echoes of laughter, the warmth of shared meals, and the comforting rhythm of everyday life. But beneath its normalcy lay a secret that had been all but forgotten, a secret buried deep within the bowels of the house. The basement, a place I had rarely ventured as a child, was mostly used for storage. Old toys, discarded furniture, and boxes of memorabilia that seemed to accumulate without anyone noticing. My parents rarely mentioned it, and I had little reason to think of it until much later, when events would conspire to draw me back to that place of shadows. It began subtly, as these things often do. I had returned to the house following the death of my father, the last of my parents to pass away, leaving me as the sole heir of their belongings and their memories. As I walked through the familiar rooms, I was overcome by a sense of nostalgia, the kind that wraps itself around you like a faded quilt, warm yet melancholic. Everything was just as I remembered, yet tinged with the unmistakable absence that loss brings. One afternoon, while sorting through my father's study, an endeavor fraught with emotions and forgotten memories, I heard a sound that was out of place. It was a low, almost imperceptible hum, like the distant whir of machinery coming from below. The sound was unfamiliar and unsettling, but I dismissed it as the old boiler or perhaps the creaking of the aging pipes. Yet, as the days wore on, the noise persisted, growing louder, more insistent, as if calling out from the depths. Driven by a curiosity I could not quite explain, I decided to explore the basement, perhaps to locate the source of the disturbance or merely to reacquaint myself with a part of the house that seemed shrouded in mystery. The stairs leading down were narrow and steep, the light switch at the top of the landing reluctant to perform its duty, flickering feebly before bathing the descent in a dim, yellow glow. As I reached the bottom, the humming became clearer, resonating through the thick, cool air. It seemed to emanate from the far corner, where the shadows lay heaviest, and where, to my surprise, I found a door I had never noticed before. It was a simple wooden door, unremarkable except for the fact that it had no handle. A faint sense of apprehension tugged at my mind, but my curiosity was stronger. I pressed my ear against the door, the hum now a palpable vibration against the wood. There was something behind it, something alive, or so it seemed. I knocked lightly, a foolish gesture perhaps, but one that felt necessary. The sound reverberated through the space, and I waited, half expecting an answer. Minutes passed, and there was nothing. No response, no change in the sound. Just the steady, pulsating hum. Leaving the basement that day, I felt a creeping unease, as if I had disturbed something better left alone. Yet, the rational part of my mind dismissed these fears, attributing them to stress and the residual grief I carried. Nevertheless, the next few nights were restless. My dreams were filled with the same monotonous hum, echoing in the corridors of sleep, pulling me back to the basement with an inexplicable urgency. Compelled to return, I descended once more into the darkness, this time armed with a flashlight and a resolve to uncover the truth. The door, still handleless and resolute, awaited me. The light from the flashlight danced across its surface, revealing the grain of the wood, the slight imperfections that made it seem almost human. I leaned closer, pressing against it, and to my astonishment, it moved. Not much, just a fraction, but enough to suggest that it was, indeed, a door that could be opened. There was a mechanism at play, one that was not immediately apparent. I felt along the edges, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of hinges, and then a small indentation, a recess that might hold the key to its secrets. My mind raced with possibilities, each more implausible than the last. But I was committed now, the mystery consuming me. Days turned into weeks, and the house seemed to grow quieter, or maybe it was just me, becoming insular, introspective, focused solely on the puzzle that lay beneath. I became convinced that the answer was within reach, that just beyond that door was something significant, something that had been waiting for me my entire life. Then, one night, as I lay in bed, listening to the interminable hum, a thought struck me, as clear and sharp as a knife's edge. The hum had a pattern, a rhythm that was familiar. I leapt from my bed, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement, and rushed down to the basement once more. The indentation in the door was not merely decorative. It was a lock of sorts, one that required a specific series of knocks, a code that mirrored the hum itself. I stood before the door, hands trembling, and began to knock, hesitant at first, then with growing certainty as the rhythm took hold. There was a pause, a moment stretched thin and taut before a soft click sounded from within. The door swung inward with a reluctant creak, revealing a narrow passageway, dimly lit and lined with stone. The air was heavy, damp with the scent of earth and age, and I stepped forward, compelled by an invisible force. The passage sloped gently downward, the hum now a constant presence, guiding me deeper into the unknown. Every step felt significant, my senses heightened, aware of every sound, every shift in the air around me. As I descended, the walls closed in, the space growing tighter, more claustrophobic. The hum seemed to vibrate through me, a living thing, almost as if the house itself was breathing, its secrets finally exhaling after years of silence. And then, abruptly, the passage opened into a cavernous room, its vastness unexpected, overwhelming. The source of the hum lay at its center, a large, intricately designed contraption, its purpose unclear, but its presence undeniable. It thrummed with energy, a pulsating heart at the core of the house. I circled it cautiously, drawn to its enigmatic allure, yet wary of its power. There were symbols etched into its surface, unfamiliar but resonant, as if they spoke to a part of me I had long forgotten. I reached out tentatively, my fingers grazing the cold metal, and felt a jolt, a connection that sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if the machine recognized me, acknowledged my presence. And in that moment, flashes of understanding surged through my mind, fragments of memories not my own, a legacy interwoven with the very fabric of the house. The truth was incomprehensible, a revelation that defied logic yet felt irrevocably true. This machine, this ancient mechanism, was a conduit, a bridge between worlds, maintained by the generations that had lived within these walls. My parents had known, though they never spoke of it, their silence of protection, a burden passed down through time. I was part of this lineage, a guardian, though I had never chosen to be. As I stood there, enveloped by the hum, the weight of understanding settled upon me. I was not alone. The house was alive with the presence of those who had come before, their whispers a gentle reassurance. The danger, the unseen force that had haunted my waking dreams, was not external, but a part of this sacred duty to maintain the balance, to keep the doorway sealed. With newfound clarity, I backed away from the machine, the hum receding to a distant whisper as I retraced my steps, emerging once more into the basement. The door closed behind me with a quiet finality, the passage hid me once more in shadow. I emerged into the light of day, the world above unchanged yet irrevocably altered in my perception. The days that followed were marked by a profound sense of peace, the anxiety and fear that had gripped me finally vanished. I understood now that the true horror lay not in the unknown, but in the denial of one's purpose. The house, with all its secrets, was my inheritance, and the hum its eternal reminder of the delicate balance I was now bound to uphold. And so, life resumed its steady rhythm, the house a tranquil sanctuary once more. Yet, beneath the surface, the hum persisted, a constant companion in the quiet moments, a reminder of the unseen world that thrived just beyond our perception. It was a comfort now, a melody that spoke of continuity, of an unbroken chain linking past to present, whispering of the secrets that lay beneath, waiting for the next guardian to listen, to understand. The legacy of the basement's secrets was mine to bear, a haunting truth that lingered, yet brought with it a sense of belonging, a connection to something greater than myself. And as I settled into the house that had been my childhood home, I realized that the true horror was not in what I had discovered, but in the realization that it had always been there, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself to me. a silent guardian in the depths of my own consciousness. The Pennsylvania countryside in October was a picture of serene beauty, with its rolling hills blanketed in warm hues of crimson and gold. The small farm town of Millfield rested comfortably within this landscape, its streets lined with quaint houses and rustic barns. Life here moved at a gentle pace, untouched by the cacophony of the modern world. It was under this veneer of tranquility that I found myself inheriting a small, unremarkable farmhouse from a distant uncle I barely remembered. His passing had been sudden, the cause ascribed to natural reasons. The town spoke warmly of him, but there were stories, hushed whispers, really, that suggested he was a man of peculiar habits. I arrived on a brisk autumn afternoon, the air crisp and the sky a dull gray, hinting at the onset of evening rain. The farmhouse stood at the end of a gravel path, its paint weathered and roof slightly sagging. It exuded an air of age and quiet dignity, as if it had grown out of the very earth it sat upon. The place felt familiar, in a way old photographs of relatives you never met do, their images etched into your memory solely by familiar lore. The interior was a testament to years of careful upkeep. Everything was functional but well worn. The walls bore the scent of pine and old wood, mingling with a faint, inexplicable musk. Each room held echoes of a bygone era, with furniture that seemed to have little changed since the house was built. There was a peculiar charm and a sense of solitude that was inviting, almost as if the house itself was waiting for my arrival. As I settled in, I took to wandering the property, exploring the nooks and crannies of my new abode. It was during one such exploration that I discovered the basement. The entrance was unassuming, a simple wooden door set into the floor of the pantry, partially concealed by a threadbare rug. Pulling the door open, I was met with a creak of rusty hinges and a waft of cool, earthy air. Hesitation gripped me for a fleeting moment before curiosity got the better of me. The stairs descended into darkness, and I flicked on the light switch, which to my surprise worked perfectly. A single bulb suspended from the ceiling cast a pallid glow over the space, revealing a cluttered array of old furniture, boxes, and tools. It was a typical basement, yet there was something about it that felt incongruous with the rest of the house, something I couldn't quite place. During the following days, the basement occupied a corner of my thoughts, like an unsolved puzzle. It was an innocuous place by all appearances, yet the feeling of unease evoked lingered. I began spending more time there, drawn inexplicably to its confines. I would sift through the myriad of forgotten belongings, searching for a clue, a hint, or perhaps a relic of my uncle's life that might illuminate his peculiar nature. It was during one of these forays that I made an unsettling discovery. Among the cobwebs and dust, I found an old, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was slanted and difficult to read, but it was unmistakably my uncle's. At first, the entries appeared mundane, a record of daily events and musings, until I stumbled upon a passage that sent a chill through my spine. It spoke of a secret, one hidden deep within the house, a legacy of sorts that he had inherited and in turn passed on to me. The words were cryptic, but they implied something beneath the surface of normalcy, something that lay dormant. As I continued reading, I pieced together a tale that seemed woven with fantasy and dread. My uncle wrote of an ancient force he had discovered, something that resided in the basement and had the ability to transform the very essence of a person. He referred to it as the Shadow, an entity that thrived on fear and darkness. I scoffed at the notion, dismissing it as the ramblings of a man who had perhaps lost his grip on reality. Yet, a seed of doubt was planted, and I found myself increasingly drawn to the basement's shadows, as if beckoned by an unseen presence. Each visit felt like a performance of defiance against my own skepticism, daring the darkness to reveal itself. Days turned to weeks, and with each passing day, the boundary between reality and imagination blurred. The basement became an obsession, a siren call that I could not ignore. My sleep was haunted by dreams, if they could be called such, of dark shapes and whispers, of being enveloped by an inky void. I would awaken drenched in sweat, the echoes of those dreams clinging to my consciousness. It was on a particularly stormy night that the air seemed charged with a palpable energy, as if the heavens themselves were conspiring with the earth below. Rain lashed against the windows, and wind howled through the crevices of the old farmhouse. In a trance-like state, I was drawn once more to the basement, my footsteps guided by an impulse I could neither understand nor resist. As I descended the stairs, the light bulb above flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced along the walls. The sensation of being watched was overwhelming, a prickling at the back of my neck that made the hairs stand on end. I stood there amidst the relics of the past, feeling the weight of the atmosphere pressing down upon me. In that charged silence, I heard it, a faint rustling, like the whisper of fabric on fabric, or the gentle caress of a breeze on leaves. It seemed to originate from the far corner of the basement, where the light was weakest. The shadows there were dense, forming a near impenetrable curtain of blackness. What occurred next defies logic, and even now I question my sanity. The shadows began to shift, coalescing into a form that seemed to rise from the very floor itself. It was an amorphous silhouette, devoid of features, yet undeniably sentient. It loomed there, a living embodiment of shadow, its presence suffusing the room with a profound coldness. I stood frozen, my mind a cacophony of terror and disbelief. The shadow advanced, its movements smooth and deliberate, as if testing the boundaries of its own existence. I wanted to flee, to bolt up the stairs and never return, but my feet were rooted to the spot, held captive by an invisible force. And then it spoke, not through words, but through emotion and thought, a voice not heard but felt. It filled my mind with images, flashes of understanding that transcended language. It showed me the truth of its existence, the centuries it had spent in slumber, feeding off the fear and darkness of those who dared to venture into its domain. I understood then that my uncle had not gone mad, that his journal was not merely the product of a deluded mind. He had known the shadow, had bargained with it, coexisted with it. And now it was my turn. The shadow offered a pact, a symbiosis of sorts. It would grant me its power, the ability to see beyond the veil of reality, to experience the world in a way others could not. In return, it demanded sanctuary, sustenance from the shadows of my own soul. In that moment, torn between the rational and the supernatural, I made a choice, one that I still question. I accepted its offer, feeling the shadows seep into my very being, merging with my essence. A wave of energy flowed through me, exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. I was transformed, no longer just a man, but something more, something that defied description. The shadow receded, retreating to the corners of the basement, leaving behind a silence that was almost comforting. I found myself standing alone, yet not alone, an awareness of the shadow's presence forever intertwined with my own. The basement felt different now, less oppressive, but still charged with an underlying tension. In the days that followed, I noticed changes. My senses were heightened, and the world appeared sharper, more vivid. I could perceive things others could not, see into the hearts of men, understand the whispers of the wind. The shadow was a constant companion, a silent observer that watched through my eyes, an entity that was both a lie and enigma. Yet, with this newfound power came a lingering fear, a knowledge that the shadow's hunger was insatiable, that it thrived on the darkness within me. I moved through life as if walking a tightrope, aware that any misstep could tip the balance, that the shadow's influence could grow beyond my control. The town of Millfield remained blissfully unaware of the secret that lay beneath one of its modest homes. To them, I was simply the new occupant of the old farmhouse, a man who kept to himself, much like the uncle before him. They spoke to me kindly, their smiles warm and genuine, unaware of the shadow that shared my existence. And so, life continued, a fragile equilibrium maintained between the ordinary and the extraordinary. but the shadow was ever present, a reminder of the path I had made. It was patient, content to wait in the darkness, knowing that time was on its side. As autumn gave way to winter, the landscape was transformed into a blanket of white, the farmhouse standing resolute against the chill. I would often find myself gazing out at the snow-covered fields, pondering the choices that had led me here, the secrets that lay beneath the surface of my new life. The secret of the basement remained just that, a secret. And though the shadow and I were bound, the fear lingered, a constant companion that whispered of the unknown paths that lay ahead. In accepting the shadow, I had stepped into a world where reality and nightmare intertwined, a world where the line between man and monster was blurred beyond recognition. Yet in the quiet moments, when the wind howled and the snow fell softly, I found solace in the knowledge that I was not alone. The shadow was there, a whisper in the darkness, a part of me now and forever. And despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, I understood that this was my legacy, a secret shared with the shadows, a dance with the darkness that would continue long after the world above had forgotten my name. It was during the late autumn when the fields around my rural home turned into a canvas of withered stalks and scattered leaves. The air had a crisp bite, and the sky often hung low with the threat of rain. This was when I found solace in the solitude of my home, a small but comfortable dwelling nestled at the edge of a vast, sprawling field. The field stretched far and wide, a sea of brown and gold, a stark contrast against the darkening sky. Life was simple here, predictable almost. My days were spent tending to the small patch of vegetables I grew, and my evenings were given to quiet reading by the fireplace. The rhythm of my life was like a lullaby, gentle and undisturbed. It was a comforting monotony, one that soothed my often restless mind. The first disturbance to my tranquil life arrived without warning. It was a Saturday afternoon when I first saw him, a figure standing at the far end of the field, just at the edge where my land met the woods. He was too far for me to make out any distinct features, but there was something eerily familiar about him, something that tugged at the edges of my consciousness like an unfinished thought. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the light or perhaps a local wanderer aimlessly idling by. But as the days passed, the sightings increased. Each time I looked out from my kitchen window or from my place on the porch, I would see him, always standing at the same spot, always watching. I tried to ignore the unease that began to gnaw at me. I told myself it was nothing, that my mind was playing tricks on me, a product of too much solitude. Yet, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched, a sensation that clung to my skin like an unwelcome second layer. The real escalation began on a night when the wind howled fiercely, rattling the windows and whispering secrets through the cracks in the walls. I was curled up on my sofa, a book in hand, when a soft knock echoed through the house. It was so faint, I almost dismissed it as another whim of the wind. But then it came again, more insistent this time. With cautious steps, I approached the door, my heart thrumming in my chest. I opened it to find nothing but the endless stretch of darkness and the relentless patter of rain. Shivering, I closed the door, telling myself it was just the wind, just the house settling into the night. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The next morning, I found footprints in the mud near my front door, prints that mirrored the soles of my own boots. A chill ran down my spine, and I could no longer deny the truth that had been creeping at the edges of my mind. The figure in the field was not just a figment of my imagination. It was real, and it was somehow connected to me. I spent the day in a state of heightened paranoia, jumping at every sound, every movement. I felt trapped in my own home, a prisoner of my fears. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of burning orange, I decided to confront whatever was haunting me. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and the courage I managed to muster, I stepped out into the field. The grass crunched under my feet as I walked towards the spot where I had seen him the most. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, and the only sound was the rapid beating of my heart. As I drew closer, I saw him again, standing amidst the shadows cast by the tree line. I stopped, my heart in my throat. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I pointed it towards him. The beam of light sliced through the darkness, illuminating his face. I gasped, the sound escaping my lips like a prayer broken by disbelief. Staring back at me was my own face, a perfect replica of my own features, yet devoid of warmth, of life. The world seemed to tilt, and for a moment I felt untethered, as if I were floating in a void of my own making. My doppelganger stood there, an impassive witness to my unraveling. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my voice was locked in my throat, frozen by the sheer incomprehensibility of the situation. The figure turned, slowly, and began to walk away, disappearing into the thick shadows of the forest. I stood rooted to the spot, my mind a cacophony of questions and fears. I watched until he vanished completely, leaving me alone in the frigid night. I stumbled back to my house, the warmth of the interior doing little to thaw the cold dread that had settled within me. That night, sleep eluded me, my mind replaying the encounter over and over, each iteration more haunting than the last. Days turned into weeks, and the sightings became more frequent. My double seemed to be everywhere, at the edge of the field, reflected in the glass of my windows, even in the distorted shadows cast by the firelight. Each time he was silent, a spectral reflection of my own existence, and each time I felt a part of me slip further into madness. I began to question my own identity, my own reality. Who was I if not just a reflection, a mere shadow of something greater or more sinister? The line between what was real and what was imagined blurred, and I felt myself teetering on the brink of an abyss, one that threatened to swallow me whole. The climax came on a night when the world seemed to hold its breath. The air was still, the silence oppressive. I was sitting by the window, watching the field, when I saw him again, closer this time, his features more defined, more real. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched him approach the house, his movements deliberate, almost taunting. I couldn't look away, mesmerized by the surreal horror unfolding before me. He stopped just outside the window, his eyes meeting mine through the glass. There was a moment of profound stillness, a charged pause that seemed to stretch into eternity. Then, as if in a dream, I saw him raise a hand and place it against the window pane. I mirrored the gesture, my hand trembling as it met the cold glass. For a brief moment, our hands seemed to merge, a seamless blend of flesh and reflection. A surge of terror and understanding coursed through me, a realization that chilled me to my very core. He wasn't trying to replace me. He was trying to become me. As quickly as it began, the moment shattered. He withdrew his hand and turned away, fading into the night, leaving me alone with the fragments of my sanity. I collapsed onto the floor, the weight of what I had experienced pressing down on me with suffocating intensity. The fear lingered, a constant companion in the days that followed. I no longer saw him, but I felt his presence, a shadow that stretched across every moment of my life. I became a ghost in my own home, haunted by the realization that my doppelganger was not just a figment of my imagination, but a manifestation of something far more profound. I understood now that he was a part of me, a reflection of all that I had hidden away, the fears and doubts I refused to acknowledge. He was the embodiment of my darkest thoughts, a reminder that the boundaries between self and shadow are more fragile than we care to admit. As the seasons changed and the fields came alive with the first stirrings of spring, I found myself standing at the edge of the field once more. The sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the land, and for the first time in months, I felt a semblance of peace. I knew he was out there still, a part of the landscape, as much as I was. But I no longer feared him. I had come to accept his presence as a part of my own, a silent guardian of my solitude. And in that acceptance, I found a strange comfort, a sense of belonging that had eluded me for so long. The fear had not vanished, but it had transformed, no longer a chain binding me to my own despair, but a reminder of my own humanity, my own capacity to confront and embrace the shadows within. As I turned to head back to my home, I felt a gentle breeze brush against my skin, a whisper of reassurance that life, in all its mystery and terror, was a journey worth taking, no matter where the path might lead. I always found solace in the tranquil embrace of our suburban neighborhood, the rows of neatly manicured houses standing like vigilant sentinels under the vast, sprawling sky. The mornings arrived with the gentle caress of sunlight filtering through sheer curtains, casting a warm glow over the familiar contours of the room I shared with my husband, Alex. Our life was a pleasant rhythm of shared routines and small, comforting rituals. The morning coffee brewed to perfection, the gentle hum of the car as we drove to work, and the evenings spent nestled in the living room, a book or a movie our chosen companions. It was, by all accounts, a peaceful existence. Yet, amidst this veneer of normalcy, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slightly off. Not in an overt or alarming way, but like a picture that had been hung just a degree askew. It manifested in subtle ways, an object slightly out of place, a word forgotten mid-sentence, or an odd sensation of déjà vu that lingered longer than it should. I attributed it to stress, the byproduct of juggling work and domestic duties, and dismissed it with a shrug. The first disturbance occurred on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I had left work early, aiming to surprise Alex with his favorite lasagna for dinner. As I parked the car in our garage, I noticed something peculiar. The door leading from the garage to the house was ajar. I distinctly recalled locking it that morning. A slight chill crept up my spine, but I brushed it off, attributing it to my own forgetfulness. Inside, everything seemed untouched and eerily quiet. The only sound was the ticking of the clock, each tick magnifying the silence. I moved through the dimly lit house, footsteps echoing softly, until I reached our bedroom. I paused at the threshold, my hand hovering over the doorknob. When I finally pushed the door open, I was met with the sight of someone rifling through my dresser drawers. She was a mirror image, my height, my features, even wearing a dress identical to the one I owned. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, it felt like I was staring into a distorted reflection. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice a haunting echo of my own. Panic rooted me to the spot as she backed away, her gaze never leaving mine, and slipped out through the window before I could react. The encounter left me shaking. I checked the house thoroughly, ensuring every window and door was secure, then sat in the living room, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Perhaps it was a figment of my imagination, a trick of the light. Yet, the memory of her eyes, so eerily familiar, continued to gnaw at the edges of my mind. The days that followed only deepened the mystery. I began to notice small, inexplicable changes around the house. The framed photograph from our last vacation was suddenly missing, only to reappear days later in a different frame. My favorite mug, a gift from Alex, turned up shattered, though neither of us remembered breaking it. I caught glimpses of movement in mirrors, reflections that lingered a heartbeat too long. Alex sensed my unease. "Is everything okay?" he asked one evening, his brow furrowed with concern. I hesitated, debating whether to share my strange encounter, yet something held me back. The fear of being dismissed, of sounding ridiculous, kept the truth locked inside. "Just tired, I guess," I replied, forcing a smile. She accepted the answer, but watched me with a worried gaze. As the days turned into weeks, the disturbances escalated. I began to see her more often, not just in our house, but outside, lurking at the edge of my vision. She appeared in crowded streets, at the grocery store, always just far enough that I couldn't reach her. Each time, she would meet my gaze with a look of profound sadness, a silent plea I couldn't understand. One night, I awoke to find her standing at the foot of our bed, her silhouette outlined by the moonlight filtering through the blinds. A scream caught in my throat as she raised a finger to her lips, her eyes wide and pleading. I blinked, and she was gone, leaving behind a whisper of cool air. Desperation clawed at me, and I knew I needed answers. I began researching doppelgangers, imposters, anything that might explain what was happening. My search led me down a rabbit hole of folklore and urban legends, tales of beings that could mimic one's appearance, often heralding misfortune or danger. But amidst the tales of doom, I found a recurring theme: the belief that these entities were not always malevolent, sometimes serving as warnings or protectors. The escalation of these encounters reached a fever pitch on a stormy night. The wind howled like a living creature, rattling the windows and doors as rain lashed against the house. I sat in the living room, nerves frayed, when I heard a faint tapping at the window. Heart pounding, I approached and drew back the curtain. She stood there, drenched from the rain, eyes wide with desperation. "Please," she mouthed, the word lost to the roar of the storm. I hesitated for only a moment before rushing to the door and flinging it open. She stumbled inside, water pooling at her feet, and collapsed onto the floor. "We need to go," she gasped, clutching my arm with a grip that was both familiar and alien. Her eyes, identical to mine, burned with urgency. "They're coming. They'll take you." "Who?" I asked, confusion and fear warring within me. She shook her head, eyes brimming with unshed tears. "There's no time. Trust me, we need to leave now." Her urgency galvanized me into action. I found myself nodding, though every instinct screamed to question, to doubt. We hurried through the house, gathering essentials. Alex appeared, bewildered by the commotion. "What's happening?" he demanded, eyes flitting between us. "There's no time to explain," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We have to go." He hesitated, confusion etched in his features, but the fear in my eyes must have convinced him. As we hurried out into the night, the storm swallowed us, the road stretching into the darkness beyond. The car skidded slightly on the rain-slicked street, but I gripped the wheel with determination, the other me beside me, silent and tense. We drove in silence, the air thick with unasked questions and unspoken fear. The city lights faded behind us, replaced by the looming shadows of trees as we ventured deeper into the rural outskirts. She guided me with an instinctive certainty, directing me down winding roads until civilization was but a memory. Finally, we arrived at a secluded clearing, the car's headlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. She turned to me, her expression a mix of gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you for trusting me," she said softly. I nodded, the weight of everything pressing down on me. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She glanced around, eyes scanning the shadows as though expecting an unseen threat. "I don't know," she admitted, "but you're safer here. They can't reach you in this place." We spent the night in the car, sleep eluding me as I watched the darkness beyond the windows. She sat beside me, a silent sentinel, her presence both comforting and disconcerting. My mind churned with questions, but exhaustion dulled their sharp edges, and eventually I drifted into a fitful sleep. When dawn broke, painting the sky with soft hues of pink and gold, she was gone. Her absence left a hollow ache in my chest, as though a part of me had vanished with her. I stepped out of the car, the fresh morning air filling my lungs, and surveyed the quiet clearing. I returned to the house with Alex later that day, the events of the night still a vivid echo in my mind. Everything was as we had left it, yet it felt different, touched by an otherworldly presence. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting her to appear, but the house remained silent. In the weeks that followed, the disturbances ceased. Life resumed its familiar rhythm, yet a lingering unease shadowed my every step. I found myself watching the edges of mirrors, peering into shadows, searching for signs of her return. She had warned me, protected me, and in doing so, had become an indelible part of my life. Though her visits had stopped, her presence lingered, a constant reminder that reality was more fragile than it seemed. I often wondered what had driven her to me, what danger she had averted, but the answers remained elusive, hidden within the folds of a mystery I could not unravel. And so, life continued, a facade of normalcy draped over a foundation of uncertainty. I learned to live with the shadow of her memory, a silent testament to the strange and inexplicable. Even now, as I glance at my reflection, I sometimes wonder if the eyes staring back are truly mine, or if she is watching, waiting, from the other side of the glass.